What idiot designed this thing?
You did, sir.
Fair enough.
Hey guys, my name's DocJade, and welcome to episode 5 of K2SE. When I tore down the entire base to build a new one, I didn't consider making science, which was a slight mistake. So we need to set those back up. As much as I love just shoving everything onto a bus and pulling it out to make science, setups like that aren't really scalable. So let's design something more modular. Using the tile grid as reference, we can mark out a 32 by 32 area to make each science in. But I'm pretty sure I won't be able to fit the more advanced sciences into such a tight space, so I'll make it twice as tall. For organization's sake, I do want to keep concrete under each science, but with only one assembler making it, it's a little overdue for an upgrade. So I'll close this core seam and set up some more production on top of it. Only problem is, we're in a pretty rough stone shortage, and we need sand to make concrete. Also, Saren is done scanning. Let's take a look. Well, it's quite a lot smaller than I expected, but that's not a huge deal. But it is a good 50% water, which is slightly annoying if I want to automate anything large there. Oh well, back to stone. Our little patch is slowly running out of mineable resources, but we can deal with that after we finish setting up concrete. We'll grab what sand we do have, make some sticks, and hook up the water. Now, for some reason, Navis has no stone within any reasonable distance. Even with how much of the planet is revealed, I can't seem to find any. The solution? Ignore it. Back to the science setup, I want these sciences to be as tileable as possible. We're going to need a standardized input and output for all of them. So I picked what I felt were the most important items, and threw every oil product in as well. Each section will output on the top right tile, and to ensure no interference between the sections, we'll need to make sure no belts point at the edges. As for how much science will go in each section, at first I wanted to automate the bare minimum required to keep one assembler fed, but that would have been a massive waste of space, so instead, the ratios of each section will be based around what I think I can reasonably cram into that space. My first guess for red cards was 12 assemblers, but that was way off, so I rebuilt it to feed 48 assemblers. Which looks a lot better. With these sections standardized, I'll be able to add a new section every time I'm low on a certain science, and moving to the right on and on until I hit a lake. Like this one. Even then, the amount of space they take up isn't too big, so I could just landfill it in. Speaking of which, I finally found a use for all of that extra raw rare metals. We can turn it into landfill in a recycling center. I'll throw that down. Yes, I could take the science downwards to avoid the lake, but vertical bases are ugly. But I will move the sections to a slightly more convenient spot, since I do have to connect the bus to it. Now I just need to start hooking up the resources, and I'll hook up the fluids later as needed. But starting to hook that up made me realize we're almost completely out of iron plates. You might remember that the iron outpost runs on steam power. Well, since the pyroflux ran out, there wasn't any more steam production. As an emergency backup, I'll add an electric boiler to make sure we always have at least a little bit of steam production. After laying the most boring kind of pipe, I realized we're also in a copper shortage. The lower patch is almost completely dry now. If only there was a convenient and clever way to get more ore. Or we could ship it in from Saren, which is neither of those things. The iron and copper patches are decently sized, and there's also some coal on site to make power with. The only downside is this is irodite and not stone, and stone is across the river, but that's fine. After making an uneducated guesstimate on how many miners we'll need, we will also need to make a cargo rocket silo to bring with us, since launching ores with delivery cannons would be hilariously inefficient. But we're out of big electric motors, so time for some lube and an assembler for the motors named Hube. When we launch a rocket, we get some cargo sections back to reuse, and it would be nice to get back some more, but we don't have any science in orbit right now, so maybe later. Speaking of orbit, I wanted to launch myself to Saren using the space capsule, but turns out I can only go directly to orbit from Navis. I could probably launch to Saren from there, but I'm not sure how that would work, so I'll just use a full cargo rocket to get there instead. And I'll make sure to bring the parts to get back, but we're going to need quite a lot of rocket fuel. I'm guessing around 1,000 should be enough to get back. If we're going to send more rockets full of rocket fuel around, we'll definitely need to set up some better production. Another quick note, I wasn't sure if I would be able to breathe or not on Saren, but there's trees and fish everywhere, so I'm pretty sure it'll be okay, but I'll bring some life support canisters with me just in case. I'll start stockpiling all the resources I think we'll need for Saren into a chest. 3 hours till that mass ejection. Someone should really do something about that. Anyways, I'll finish making this silo, then we can blast over to Saren. Since we don't have a landing pad, we'll just have to hope all of the rocket supplies survive. One successful crash landing later, I'll clean up the landing site, then get started on power production. Then time for some coal to power it all. I would put some efficiency modules in these, but I didn't bring enough to share with the whole class. I'll put the cargo rocket silo right underneath the planet marker, then hook up a landing pad for it to get the rocket materials from. Might as well put some productivity into the rocket fuel conversion. With the rocket built, we can point it at Navis, but I forgot to build a landing pad. And we don't have one in storage for the bots to build. Luckily, I can make one remotely using a requester chest, but it will take a while. Now for the other resources. Iron, and we're out of miners already. Great. We had way too many for coal anyways. Copper. Then I'll go get stone from over yonder. Until I ran out of belts. Undergrounds it is then. After hooking those all up to the rocket, the landing pad for Navis is ready. I'll put it near the start of the bus. After filling up the rocket with a healthy mix of ores, let's send them back. I'll pull out the ores and feed them into the requester chest up here, then run the leftover rocket pieces back to rocket production. Having one silo is probably not going to work long term, so we're going to need to come up with a better system. Thankfully, you can pull all of the rocket fuel back out of the silo, but power production is so low that it's barely moving. Looks like our gas power station stopped. I'll have to look into that. We're going to move the cargo silos down here so we can build a tileable setup. Thankfully, you get all of the rocket sections back when you tear down a silo. I'll also remove the section packing. We'll put it somewhere else. Then I sorted all of the extra parts from the landing pad back into the system. That power shortage is persistent. Looks like we've managed to burn through the entire rocket fuel stockpile. Also, half the refineries weren't even plugged in. Oops. Since this is super oversized, we do have quite a lot of excess petroleum. I'll switch the gas power stations over to it instead. I would say temporarily, but we both know I'll only replace it if it breaks. And for just a bit more power, I'll use the extra coal for steam power. Then I'll immediately move the gas power stations because they're super loud and I'm tired of listening to them. Continuing base maintenance, the sand belt got landfill on it because I was using a storage chest for dirty water processing. And the bots thought that would be a great place to store it. An hour and a half till the ejection. Do I have a plan? Yes. Will I tell you what it is? No. After getting the dirt off of the sand belts, power production appears to be holding. The shipment of ore from Saren has already been completely consumed in less than 20 minutes, so I definitely need to automate delivery for that. We can use signal transmitters and receivers to send signals between planets, but the transmitter does consume 10 megawatts. The signals are sent across different channels, and I'm pretty sure there's no channel limit, which is cool. So, we can have a receiver on Navis that listens to Saren and sends rockets of supplies whenever it requests them, and put a receiver on Saren so we know what ores we need to send. If I want to do signals for each planet, I should build it as part of the cargo rocket design and set up some universal request logic. But the cargo silo has disappeared. I don't have it, and the bots don't have it. I bet it ended up on the floor somewhere. Luckily, a deconstruction planner helps me find it. Looks like my inventory was full when I picked it up. There we go. The connections on the sides of the silo for rocket fuel can be used as a pass-through, so I'll base my setup around that. I'll add the signal transmitters, and check to see if you can pick rocket destinations with signals. Unfortunately, you can't, but at least it'll simplify the setup. The rocket parts get fed in here, and since we don't have requester chests, I'll use sushi to load the rockets. Although I will go with a system that doesn't use any combinators, so it won't break if the power goes out. I'll bring it in, set up the loop, and configure the rocket logic, which will listen on its channel and launch whenever it has the materials that were requested. But to actually use this system, I'll need to place a receiver and transmitter on Saren to set up the request logic. But we're still in a stone shortage. I still don't see any stone patches, so I can't even get up there to set it up. After fixing an edge case that hasn't happened yet, 45 minutes till ejection. Well, we need stone to launch the rocket parts to send stone back. I would see if I could get to Saren using the capsule, but it takes rocket parts and rocket fuel to get there, which we have neither of right now. So I guess it's time to go back to core mining, is what I thought, until I remembered I have a bunch of cargo rocket sections in storage, which completely sidetracked me, so I started setting up the rocket sushi input. Once I was done with that and ready to go to Saren, I couldn't get in the rocket. Capsule it is then. Let's try it. After telling it to land in the middle of the space platform, we land in the middle of space without the platform. Good thing I have a jetpack. After placing the capsule down, I don't have enough rocket fuel to get to Saren. Great. So, back to Navis. After trying to get into the rocket again, turns out the signal receiver was blocking me from getting inside. Once that was out of the way, to Saren we go. I hooked up the logic to request rocket parts whenever Saren got low. 11 minutes to go. Then I went back home. I'm still gonna set up core mining though, might as well. Now that we have enough power overhead to actually power a core miner, we should be able to pump out ore at a decent speed. 5 minutes to go. I'll hook in the ores, tank the fluids, I'll hook them up to the base in a minute. Speaking of a minute, ready to hear my plan? It's based around America's favorite pastime, gambling. Since the house always loses, I'll wager that, even if a beam hits the base, the damage should be pretty minimal. So I'll bet it's just cheaper to repair it instead of setting up any defenses. Here comes the beam, which is super far away, so it looks like I'm safe. Oh, there's a second one. I thought it would just be the one. Well, it's also super far away, nothing to worry about. And a third one, right on top of a biter nest, but it's quite a bit closer. There's also one in the middle of this lake, which reveals that water can burn, and fish are impervious to all forms of attack. Another ejection will hit Saren in a day, but we'll just ignore it. After a total of 5 beams, not a single one got even near the base. I'll hook up the outputs from core mining, including a little bit of pyroflux, then redesign the whole thing because it wasn't cool enough. Still not enough stone. But the mass ejection helpfully revealed a patch up north. But it is pretty far away, which is annoying. Plus, after all that effort to set up automated ore delivery, it feels mean to go get it. I'm pretty sure the rockets do pay themselves off material-wise, but even then, it's probably not very resource efficient. So I'll cave and set up trains for all of the major resources. As for Saren, I'll turn off the rocket deliveries, but in the future we'll use the planet to make ingots instead of raw resources, which are denser and more resource efficient. But we will need pyroflux to make it, which we don't have any production for yet. Skipping ahead a bit, I reconnected the iron mine and set up a train for copper as well. But it's also time for some biter cleanup. Our pollution cloud is slowly encroaching on the bases, and we also have to clear around the new patches. To aid in clearing them out, I'll research and produce Baja Blast, which is super useful for taking out worms. But Baja blasting the worms gave me some bad karma, which was repaid with 2 of the solar panels in orbit. Keeping the biters at bay is quite a bit of manual effort, so it's probably worth it to catch at least a little bit of pollution with air purification to slow down its spread. We should have enough science in storage. I'll automate the filters and set up a loop of purifiers in the middle of the base, which should help a little bit. Then I'll move the gas power stations back over to them, since they are pretty heavy polluters, and disconnect the backup coal-powered steam production. Time to get that stone, which is just across the lake, but it's surrounded by some pretty large biter nests, so there's a lot of cleanup to do. But once they were gone, I set up the station and ran the rail back. I've always been pretty bad at rail signals, so I had to work out a few kinks. But eventually, the train got sent over, and did nothing. I forgot the chests. The iron supply is pretty good, but it doesn't quite keep up with demand, so I'll need to fit some more trains in here later. Since Baja Blast also destroys all of the trees, the pollution from the stone patch is spreading rapidly, so I've got yet more work to do. But at least we get some inedible fruits from our labor. A tad over half an hour of cleanup later, the biters are all gone. Remember the science I started making 8 hours ago? Now we can finally get back on task. I'll clear out some more space, then back to hooking up the science. Since these connections will be universal between all of the sections, and are basically a fancy bus, I shall call it the Universal Material Bus. Now that red cards are finally plugged in, let's start working on green cards. Well, not yet. We really need to fix our power situation. We're constantly chasing temporary solutions like Radio Shack. More solar panels could work, but we could also go back to nuclear power. The only problem is, since we can't research enrichment yet, we end up with a lot of leftover uranium-238, which we can't really do anything with. But it's the best choice, so we'll throw a reactor above the base. This time though, we'll build a 2x2 reactor for that sweet reactor neighbor bonus. Luckily, we have plenty of rare metals in storage to make them. Then we'll mine the uranium, with a terrible balancing setup to get 4 belts out. We'll centrifuge it on site. Actually, there's no way I'm getting 4 belts out of this. 2 is plenty. I need quite a few centrifuges, which take big electric motors, so those will definitely take a while. Might as well blueprint it at full size, though. Very slowly, we're making uranium, and since we ran out of red belts again, I'll use underground belts. Then for the reactor design. I made this, which had no way to get the fuel cells to the other side, so scratch that. And here's a better design that's split in 2. While we wait on red belts for the reactor to build, we have an extra cargo rocket, so we could send another load of science up to the space platform. But the space science production also needs more resources, mainly glass, which I don't think we can launch in a cannon since it would just shatter on impact. Oh, so you can send glass without breaking it, but green circuits? Yeah, no way. There's already another cannon chest up there, so shipping it up is nice and simple. Although we still need more space belts, which needs electric motors, which we cannot cannon up. I want to make just enough science to research vulcanite processing, since being able to make pyroflux would also solve our power issues. But at 200 science packs, we have to send up more materials. I could start the research and ship up the other cannonable ingredients, but even if we could make space science, we wouldn't have enough of the other tech cards up there. So we have to make more, which means we need more power, which means we need to finish building the reactor. Starting up the reactor will take quite a while, so I'll add substations to them all, and begrudgingly build more solar. The uranium is slowly processing, but we need 238 for the first cell, so we're at the mercy of RNG. I'll go ahead and hook up all of the water though. Eventually, we made a cell, but it'll take more than 1 to bring everything up to temperature, and we don't have enough blue circuits to make the other 3 reactors. I also forgot we have to deal with the byproducts of centrifuging. Fun. That pyroflux looks a lot more tempting now, but it's still just a tad out of reach. Well, might as well see how close we can get. I'll grab the tech cards from storage and some productivity modules, and waste almost an entire rocket sending them up, instead of just hand-delivering them with a space capsule. After putting hindsight in the rearview mirror, the lab now has productivity, and apparently there was still enough resources laying around for another cargo rocket. But we don't have very many motors to send up, so I'll make some more. Then grab some more of the other ingredients to waste just a bit less of the rocket. After launching that up and placing some new belts, apparently that's our 10th cargo rocket. Regardless, that's more space science. Which results in industrial furnace, which would let us smelt a bit faster, but we don't care. We just need it for vulcanite processing, which is up next. Shipping the raw vulcanite ore around would be pretty wasteful, and we can't turn enriched vulcanite into anything without crushed vulcanite, so we'll have to send the vulcanite blocks around, which we can turn into pyroflux with sand. Making the blocks seems pretty simple, only problem is it needs petroleum and water. And our vulcanite planet, Turgmam, is waterless, so we'll have to send in the water from Navis. I'm not sure if atmospheric condensers would be able to work up there, and even if they did, the amount of water they produce is pitiful and the energy requirements are insane. There is water ice, but we still haven't researched how to melt it yet. Plus, if we wanted to make the ice on Navis, we'd need cryonite slush, which I have no idea what that is. So, pyroflux is definitely not a short-term power solution. We need to get this base self-sufficient before we can even go and make the blocks. Solar is helping quite a lot, but we'd need a ton more to cover demand and charge for the night. If we're lucky, the centrifuges will keep spitting out 238 at a decent rate, but we can reduce the weight if we create more belts. But in a love letter to procrastinators everywhere, doing nothing magically fixed it. Oil refining managed to regain its footing, which was just enough to tip the scales. Our biggest power consumer is these 9 atmospheric condensers, which are used for rocket fuel production. We can try a different rocket fuel recipe to see if we can reduce the power draw. Using electrolysis instead of condensers, we can make oxygen, hydrogen, and chlorine, which we can combine to make hydrogen chloride. There's vulcanite processing. I'll research pyroflux smelting for the ingots next, but not right now. A couple circuit conditions to prevent backups later. That's the new rocket fuel setup, which takes at least 5 megawatts more power and is probably slower. Not that it matters though, since the reactor finally finished warming up. Hopefully it'll stay stable. The base is running at full tilt again, which reveals we're not getting enough iron. So I'll need to throw a second train onto this single rail bidirectional track. Piece of cake, right? Actually, yeah. I somehow managed to get it right on the first try. I'll upgrade the loading station to load from both sides too. Then I got a little greedy and added a third iron train, which somehow worked flawlessly. Weird. Back to the reactor setup. We still need 3 more reactors to finish it, but we still don't have any blue circuit production, and storage is completely out of them too. Well, I guess it's time to set that up. Nah, that's boring. Back to the tech cards. It just dawned on me that I have to make rocket tech cards basically from scratch in just a 32 by 64 tile area. Is that even possible? I promise we'll actually build some science in just a second, but quick side note, our iron supply is still struggling to keep up. But once we get pyroflux smelting going, we'll get 25% more iron plates per ore on top of the bonuses that we already get from productivity and all of the other steps of the process. I'll plan out all of the ratios in advance, and we'll go make the blocks right after we finish all of the sciences. I'll cue the smelting research. Hopefully there's enough science in orbit. Okay, science time. After extending the Universal Material Bus, I'll start setting up green tech cards, which take green circuits as an ingredient, which isn't on the UMB, so I'll have to make them from scratch inside the science section. Which isn't too big of a deal, but it's still pretty silly smelting bricks on site like this. Once the bots finish placing the belts, that's green cards. Nice and simple. Next is blue cards, which are quite a bit more complicated, so I'll only ratio for 12 assemblers. I thought a bot crashed on the iron mine, but then I realized we don't have bots out there. A quick field trip later, I used the satellite to look for more biters. Turns out they expanded back into the areas I cleared. I should really put a radar over here. After pulling the imminent domain card, back to blue science, which needs red circuits, and those need green circuits, and so on. Glass and silicon aren't on the UMB, so we'll have to make those for the electronic components. Which, when you don't need a lot of them, isn't that big of a deal. After plugging in the water and sulfuric acid, now I just need the blank cards, which squeeze in nicely right here. And that's blue tech cards. Now for military tech cards, which needs biter research data. Only issue is, we don't have any way to automate the biomass for it yet, because you need military to unlock bioprocessing. So we need to bootstrap military science. Bootstraps. Military. There's a joke in here somewhere. After collecting some of Radiohead's most popular song, I'll whip together some hand-fed science production. I'll start the research, but small issue. We need coke to make the biter data. I could make the wood on site, but I currently don't have a way to automate coal. So might as well just update the UMB standard to support both of them. I'll also need petroleum for the biolabs. Yes, those ones. So I'll go hook it up and tear down the temporary production. The biolabs are quite large, but worse yet, they also need oxygen, so I'll need an atmospheric condenser as well. Once I set up coke and connected the steel, that's the research data, which takes up almost half of the entire science section. After squeezing in electronic component production to finish it off, that's military tech cards. Now time for the pièce de résistance, yellow cards, which requires us to launch satellites as an ingredient. To make the design process a bit easier on myself, I hopped into a test world. This is how many of each machine we'll need, which is quite a lot. After thinking about it in 2 different colors, I put the satellite and the science assemblers on top, and started working on the ingredients one by one. First up was glass and rocket fuel, which fits pretty snugly into the bottom left corner. Green circuits on top of that, then we'll make our way over to electric furnaces, which needs heat shielding, which needs sulfur, so in comes petroleum and water for that. Now for red circuits. I'll steal some of the glass going to the satellite, and cram in silicon processing with what can best be described as insanity. After squeezing the red circuits back down to the furnaces, we'll route the furnaces upwards, then get started on speed modules, which we thankfully already make everything for. Then low density structure will go above that. Bringing the red circuits up and the glass back over, we'll start making the rocket control units, except we still need batteries and iron for those. So after carving out a path for sulfuric acid, out comes the batteries, which are also used to make accumulators. Now all that's left for the satellite is solar panels and radars. Solar panels weren't too bad, and I put basic tech cards right below them, but radars take quite a few unique ingredients to make, including stone bricks, which had to make their way all the way up here from the furnaces at the bottom. But with that, everything is automated. After a bunch of fast forwarding to make sure it actually worked, it launched the first rocket, and speed modules are on the wrong side of the belt. Luckily, it's an easy fix, and that's yellow tech cards. The best part about this setup is it's properly ratioed. Adjustable inserters? Bob's inserters? You don't need them. After stress testing the setup, I brought it out of the test world. That's all of the science done, but yellow is going to take a little while to start producing. I'll hook it up to some labs preemptively though. Let's start preparing to go to Turgmam. We're going to need quite a lot of supplies, since I want to make around 400 blocks per hour. We need 5 of the industrial furnaces, which are pretty expensive, but I already had the supplies on hand to craft them. I'll also need quite a few miners to keep the crushers fed. And to keep power consumption down, almost everything will get efficiency modules, so we'll need around 500 of them. Then a recycler and 4 pulverizers, 25 productivity 2 for the industrial furnaces. The mall needs blue circuits to make centrifuges, so might as well just throw some over here. Making enriched vulcanite is pretty similar to Kovrax enrichment, so we'll need 31 of them. This mall really sucks, but I'd rather get hit by a meteor than build a new one. Maybe later. Some manual big electric motors for centrifuges later. I'll research condenser turbines. They turn steam into power as usual, but they also give you 99% of the water back, which we will definitely need, otherwise we'd be shipping in insane amounts of water just for power production. Oh, and a cannon to send the blocks back with. Still waiting on yellow cards to spin up, but for now we can send a bunch of the other cards up. With those, we should be able to research everything we need. On Turgmam, we need to make the cargo pods to launch the blocks back to Navis with, but I'm feeling a little lazy, so we can just launch up all of the ingredients for the pods, and sulfur for the vulcanite enrichment. We end up with quite a few cannons. Our base doesn't have any explosive production, so I'll make it on site. Then I'll hook up all of the inputs to the cannons with circuit conditions, so Turgmam can yell at them when it needs resources. After hooking up water and lube, I'll place a chest that'll request the blocks from Turgmam. Still waiting on efficiency modules. There's condenser turbines. They're pretty expensive, but luckily we only need a few of them. After dying from boredom, I think that's enough modules. I'll set the destination, which takes quite a bit more rocket fuel than Saren, then load the rocket up with all of the supplies, then move the important supplies back into my inventory just in case. Pyroflux smelting finishes, which I couldn't fit into the script in a clever way, so I had to resort to using self-referential humor instead. After pressing the aptly named launch button, we land on Turgmam. A quick dump later. We're not really at the center of the planet, which bothers me, so I'll start moving stuff up. Might as well scan the planet too. Which turned out to be a pretty good idea, because there's this massive area with no cliffs up here, which is convenient since I only brought 12 cliff explosives. First up is the vulcanite ore, which is a really nice shade of red that reminds me of pop rocks. After bringing it down to 4 belts, I cancelled the surface scan because it was getting massive. Making the enriched vulcanite is only a couple of steps, but there's a lot of byproduct stone and sand. First you have to crush the ore to get crushed vulcanite, which makes some stone that'll turn into landfill. Then we feed the crushed vulcanite into these centrifuges, along with some sulfur and enriched vulcanite, which we occasionally get from the pulverizers. The output is a mix of enriched vulcanite, crushed vulcanite, and sand. We'll set up the vulcanite blocks in just a second. First, I want to set up the item request system, which for some reason I set up for barreled lube instead of petroleum. Luckily, I can fix that remotely. I built some solar panels to try to get the requests running, but the transmitter doesn't work at all when it's on low power. I hooked up the centrifuges, then realized I can just manually launch the cannons. Sulfur for enriching. To make the blocks, we mix the enriched vulcanite with crushed vulcanite, plus some water and petroleum. We do get steam as a byproduct, and we can send that into the condenser turbines to get some of the water back. Luckily, you can use the vulcanite blocks as fuel for the boilers, which simplifies the setup quite a bit. After manually shipping up some water and petroleum to get the cube rolling, we're very slowly making some blocks. I also recycle the barrels from the fluids back into steel plates, since steel plates are more dense when you store them. There's our first blocks. They make their way up to the boilers, but we're so low on water that they're pretty much useless. I unplugged the transmitter to let everything run at full speed and charge the accumulators. Then I plugged it back in, which started up all of the cannons on Navis. After dealing with some throughput issues, we still don't have enough water, because the transmitter keeps running out of power before we can buffer enough of it. I also realized we shouldn't be using the blocks as fuel directly, since we can turn them into fuel in the fuel processors for some free energy. But I didn't bring one, and I'm completely out of iron plates. So after hand mining and smelting some iron, that's 10% more fuel per item. Then I'll enable the block launcher to start sending them back to Navis. The power draw is pretty high, but it shouldn't be launching too often, it'll be fine. We aren't quite meeting the required 4 belts of input, and I don't have enough belts to go mine another patch. Luckily, I apparently never researched mining productivity 2, which was locked behind a better mining drill that I also didn't know about. Hopefully that'll give it a decent bump. All of the cannon chests appear to be requesting the correct amount of items, but just to future-proof, I'll put an electric boiler and another cannon chest over here, so we can ship in ice and melt it in the future. Might as well queue them. We probably won't be able to make the ice for a while, but we might be able to mine it from some asteroids or something. After hooking that up, we're ready to head back. Except there's this dark spot on the map that I want to check out. Oh, it's a little building. Okay, hold on. If you intend on playing space exploration yourself, I'm pretty sure this is where the spoilers begin. So this is your chance to decide if you want to keep watching or not. Okay, let's continue. I waltzed inside, which to my surprise was filled with quite a few biter nests. But I did bring a couple military supplies with me, so let's see if I can clear it out. It took a while, but I eventually got them all. There's some cool designs on the floor, and it looks like my efforts were rewarded with a Productivity 9 module. I'll have to put that in a lab at some point. I really wanted to take the container with me too, but sadly I couldn't pick it up. Time to head back to Navis. Being able to emergency burn back to Navis from anywhere seems slightly overpowered. Also, yellow tech cards must be running, since we just discovered a new moon. I left some robots behind with repair packs just in case some meteors happen to hit something. Back home, we've got the blocks. I'll immediately turn some into pyroflux and hook it up to the dowsing setup, which does absolutely nothing because the nuclear setup is already powering everything by itself. So all of that worry about making pyroflux for power was completely pointless after all. But we can use the pyroflux to set up pyroflux smelting, which we shall do next time. I'd like to take a moment to thank my supporters on Ko-fi. From now on, I'm attempting to keep a 2-week schedule for every episode of K2SC. Right now, as I'm writing the script, not as I'm reading it, I'll read it later. Anyways, I'm currently over a week ahead of schedule on this episode. If I can continue to stay far enough ahead, I might be able to squeeze in another non-K2SC video. We'll see. And that's all for today. My name's DocJade. Bye-bye. Man, I'm losing my voice.